المدرسة صوت على قلبي عسل يلا يا باص المدرسة خدنا على درب الأمل زمر باص المدرسة صوت على قلبي عسل يلا يا باص المدرسة خدنا على درب الأمل.
Assalamu alaikum. I am Shakira Akabo and you are watching Schools Out. In today's episode of Schools Out, we are talking about ADHD or Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. With me today, I have Margie Dick, an educational psychologist with years of experience in treating learners with ADHD. Welcome to the show, Margie.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, Shakira, as you said, I have spent 27 years working with children in the mainstream for 11 years and in various schools where children have problems, and then the last several years in my own practice. And I enjoy working with children that have challenges, and basically they are mostly to do with attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder.
Okay. Tell us exactly, Margie, what are the symptoms or how do we know what a child with ADHD looks like?
This is usually a neurological disorder. It's regarded as a neurological disorder, and there are three main symptoms. One is a short attention span. Secondly, distractibility. They're highly distractible children and can be distracted very quickly from what they're doing. And then there's sometimes impulsivity and occasionally hyperactivity as well.
What do parents need to know when they're told that your child has ADHD?
The first thing parents have to do is to have the child assessed, because you want to ascertain whether that child has other learning problems as well. For instance, do they have the ability that's required to do the specific standard that they're in? And mostly the answer to that is yes. Then they have to look at scholastic abilities. And to do that, you'd go to an educational psychologist. They would do the standardized tests and they would see if that child differs from the standardized tests. Usually 2 years difference indicates that there's a problem. And from there, one would then refer to the medical practitioner or decide to do some intervention for the attention deficit.
Okay, so you mentioned interventions, and now commonly parents are told the very controversial issue of medicating a child. Tell us about medicating a child.
Well, because it's a neurological problem, there's a discrepancy in the waves in the head, and usually one would also like to know what that discrepancy is. So perhaps another first would be to have what we call a QEEG, and that will define for us whether the child really is ADD. So, and the alternative medication or route to medication would be the neurotherapy. However, it's quite a long process and it's quite expensive, but it does work very well and it's very long lasting. There are other alternatives like homeopathic medications and so on. But if the child is truly attention deficit, that child is losing over 35% of what the teacher is saying in class. So your rule of thumb is, what is the best for your child? The best interest of the child is where you decide, do I medicate or do I try alternatives? There's no harm in trying an alternative first, but if it doesn't work as efficiently and quickly as is needed, then I would suggest that one actually goes the medication route.
Okay. If a parent chooses the medication route,
Right.
what should the parent be aware of? Like side effects, like changes in the child?
Any medication is going to have side effects, and they've modernized the medications so that they have a more long-lasting effect. In the old days, for instance, if a child took Ritalin, it would have passed out after a couple of hours. So now they have medications that last longer and spread out over the day. And it does tend to suppress the appetite. So the alternative to that is just to make sure that the child eats breakfast, eats lunch and eats supper. They don't usually feel like it because of this appetite suppressant that is in it. Usually the right person to give the medication would be a neurologist, and they would make sure that the dose is correct. Then you don't get the child overdosed or underdosed, and they monitor the dose regularly so that if it's correct, there should be no visible side effects, except perhaps a little feeling of nausea early in the morning, which by eating usually disappears after a while.
And when it comes to the dose, as you mentioned with the neurologist, is this like a trial and error type of thing where they figure it out per child?
It is figured out per child, but it's based on age, height, build, and that's why you would use a medical practitioner. You wouldn't just, nobody but a medical practitioner can actually prescribe the drugs that are needed.
Right, okay. And what are some of the ways that you can suggest children with ADHD be better managed within the classroom?
Well, if we look at the different symptoms, the short attention span is managed very well when the child is not distracted by too many visual and auditory stimuli, for instance. So an over-busy classroom doesn't suit the child that's inattentive. Usually, if you put screens between the desks, and for instance, in a cluster arrangement, if you have screens between them, then the child feels as if he's in a little cubicle on his own, and now he can focus better. So also with the distractibility, because they want to move all the time, sometimes those balancing cushions that an OT uses are good to sit on.
Okay.
And then you get the impulsivity, for instance, and giving children frequent breaks helps a little bit, especially when they're studying. If they go outside and they jump on the trampoline for a bit or play with the dog and then come back inside and learn again. You need a lot of positive reinforcement for children with attention deficit. They look for attention all the time, and if that attention is positive rather than screaming, shouting or smacking, then they tend to respond better. So a system where you have stickers, for instance, and for every 5 stickers you get a little magic box where you can choose an eraser or a little toy, still helps them to want to finish the work and get it done in order to get their reward. So they work well with the reward system.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier about rewarding the child. In terms of what else can teachers do if they have like 40 in a class, because that's not the ideal situation? What could a teacher do in that scenario?
Well, one of the suggestions that I got from an OT was that for a very hyperactive child, one could try a piece of elastic that goes around the child's legs and through the first 2 legs of the chair. That makes it very much more difficult for the child to hop up and run around the classroom. I haven't tried it myself because in the last couple of years I usually work one-on-one, but I should imagine in a class of 40 that this might just keep them seated for a little while longer. And it certainly doesn't cause any damage or hurt the child. Just makes it more difficult to get out of the chair.
Right, okay. And a lot of teachers would complain that getting the children disciplined or managed within the classroom behavior-wise is a big challenge. Any gems regarding that?
I think the stickers or the tokens are probably the best bet for the teacher, because if the child doesn't finish his work, and that's usually your problem, either with a child who just has attention deficit symptoms and might sit in the back of the classroom and just be unnoticed, but not finish his work. The stickers will mean that the work is finished. And then the reward at the end of 5 stickers seems to spur them on to want to actually finish the work.
And reach the next level.
And reach the next level, yes.
Before we leave, Margie, I just want to ask you one last question that I find often teachers themselves get frustrated with. The ordinary so-called behavior management strategies of like shouting at the child or leaving them outside or putting them in a corner. Does that actually work with ADHD learners?
No. The ADHD child doesn't like being shouted at, and they don't like corporal punishment either. It tends to make them angry and they get wild. Far better would be to use a strategy of counting to 3, rather slowly at first, so that they can focus by the time that you've said 1, and then maybe you could repeat the instruction, and then 2, and eventually 3. You would still have to use some kind of punishment at the end if they haven't listened by the time it's 3, but use a logical consequence. In other words, if they haven't packed up their books by the time you've said now pack up, and you're on 3 and they haven't packed up, then they stay a few extra minutes while everybody else has gone out to play. Something like that. It needs to be logical. And it needs to be a consequence of their behavior.
Okay, all right. And is there anything the parents could do? Because often the behavior management strategies used in the classroom is different to what moms and dads use at home.
That's right. So a timeout works better, but then you have to watch them, because they tend to want to move off the mat or move out of their room. So when you use a timeout strategy, don't make it too long so that they can be rewarded for the timeout and then get them to listen. You can use the counting there too as well.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Margie. We are now going to leave for an ad break, but stay with us. We'll be back. Welcome back. With us today we have Yasmin Ghani from Crossroads Remedial School in Johannesburg. Assalamu alaikum, Yasmin. Welcome to the show.
Jazakallah wa alaikum assalam.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
My name is Yasmin Ghani, as you know. I'm a teacher here at Crossroads School. I've been teaching for the past 6 years in the foundation phase, and it's my absolute passion. It's what I love doing.
Okay. Yasmin, tell us about your experience with ADHD learners.
Okay, I must say, since I started teaching at a remedial school, I've been exposed to the different forms of ADD. You know, when we think of ADD, we just think of hyperactive. But there are so many different forms, and they're all just individuals that we need to cater for their needs and give them the tools to survive out there in the school environment. So the different types of ADD that I've come across is those kids that have impulsivity, distractibility, disorganization, also those that seek sensory integration, so they would need lots of movement breaks. And sometimes we would see that as not listening or misbehaving, but they're just seeking that extra movement.
Right.
Yeah.
So they need to always be active.
They
moving.
need to be active, yeah.
Okay. And from your experience teaching the ADHD learners at Crossroads, what kind of devices or strategies you use in the classroom with them?
Okay, so we look at the child as an individual and their type of ADD that they have, and together with a team of psychologists and the teacher, occupational therapists, speech therapists, depending on their need, we devise a program for them. For example, a child with disorganizational skills, I'd put a mat on her desk, which will give her the place where to put her pencil case, where to put her books, so she knows where to place the things, just to give her that structure that she needs. Another example is a child that needs movement breaks, like I was talking about earlier. He'd sometimes sit on a ball chair so that he can bounce or get that movement as he needs. But I know it's not always the case in mainstream schools to have this type of equipment.
Yes.
We also put a mat on his desk with different types of exercises, which any teacher can do and incorporate that into her class. So before they reach the level of anxiety or where you're feeling that they're becoming out of hand, as we would see it, give them the movement break, let them do stretches and things like that, and then come sit down again so that they can refocus themselves.
So they must get the break within the classroom.
Within
as
the
rest of
classroom.
Kids are busy working.
Yeah.
They need a few minutes to
They just
themselves.
need that few minutes to stand up, do a few stretches, and then they can bring themselves back to doing their work.
Yes, and that's perfectly
Yeah.
doable.
And then to help with children with anxiety, we usually put up the routine on the board for the whole class to see, so they can see exactly what period comes after what. So if they have maths first, then life skills, literacy, whatever comes like with the time. So children that experience anxiety, they can see, okay, this is what's going to happen next, and this is how my day is planned. And that also reduces the questions all the time. What am I doing next? What am I doing next? And sometimes the teacher doesn't have that time to answer all these questions, especially in a class with 30 kids and 40 kids. Just this is also a good strategy for the teacher.
Yes,
Yeah.
so that she can manage also, as you say, lessening the anxiety
Yeah.
for the child, and therefore the questions that she
Yeah.
can also get. And Yasmin, in your experience from teaching in your school, how many kids are there in your class? Around
14.
14.
14.
Okay, so it's obviously a manageable number.
Yes,
each
definitely.
one with their own learning disabilities. Obviously, ADHD is one of your
Yes.
your specialities, and that's what you always focus on. What is difference then between your school, which is a remedial school, and another school, which could be a special needs school?
So our school just caters for children with mild learning disabilities. So some of them would have ADHD, some would seek sensory integration, others would be dyslexic or dyspraxic. So, reading and writing is a problem, planning their work they need help with that. But a special needs school, on the other hand, is learners with more severe disabilities. So those that have Down syndrome and cerebral palsy. And our school also gives them the tools that hopefully one day they will be able to mainstream.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay,
So we try and get them ready for mainstream schools.
Okay, all right.
If they're unable to mainstream by grade 7, then they sit with the principal and she gives them a plan of what is the best school for them, maybe a tutoring center, homeschooling, assisted learning schools.
Okay, that's for the high school.
That's for high school, because our school goes up to grade 7.
Okay, and in terms of the parents, how important is it that the parent is on the same page, or that you get the support of the parent?
No, I think sometimes it takes a long time for the parent to accept that their child has needs and needs help. And as soon as they can accept that their child needs this, and once the teacher and the parent work together, it's amazing how much their child can achieve. So it's so important for the parent to be in constant contact with the teacher, knowing, especially when it comes to things like medication, is the medication working? Is the child eating? Because sometimes with the medication, they're nauseous and they don't feel like eating.
Right.
So, for the teacher to keep an eye on that and be in constant communication with the parent. Sometimes the medication can increase anxiety, or there's a lot of different side effects. So it's so important for the parent to be in constant communication with the teacher.
With the teacher, so that all of you now are able to help manage the child.
And then there's different strategies that the parents can use at home, like maybe just having, we have a routine timetable here at school, a routine for their child at home, like what time is bedtime and what they need to do next, make their bed or tidy up their room. They need to visually see it, so that they can understand it.
So that they can understand.
Also making sure that they put their homework, so you physically have to watch them, put their homework folder in their bag. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a lot of you would say, keeping the child within a structure and a routine.
Yes.
For them to better able to cope.
Definitely, yeah.
Any other words of advice you could give to teachers
It's just one more thing I wanted to add to behavior. I know with ADD comes a lot of behavioral issues. So we've also, sometimes we have a reward system, and I'm sure most schools have like a monitoring timetable. So a child that's in charge of handing out the books or doing the timetable, and that also helps to curb behavior. But children that need reward for more shorter periods, like after every lesson, what we do is we give them a smiley face per lesson that they behaved. And at the end of the day, they get their reward. So that keeps them motivated throughout the day. Because for them to wait for the reward by the end of the week, it's just too long.
They probably forget about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right. Thank you so much for
Okay.
speaking
Thank
to
you
us,
so much.
Yasmin. It
Thank
was
you
such a
so much for having me. Okay.
And that's it.
زمر باص المدرسة صوت على زمر باص المدرسة صوت على
We're now speaking to Washango Kimani, who is a researcher at the Wits School of Education in Inclusive Education. Welcome, Washango.
Thank you, Shakira.
Okay, so tell us about the specific challenges that face both teachers and learners when we use this term ADHD in the classroom.
Here in South Africa, one of the biggest problems is that the term ADHD is not considered, the way we use it is not considered a problem. And I think, and even some research has shown, that it is a problem the way we state it, because it shows that a child has a problem. And from a teacher's perspective, when you consider that a child has a problem, you often, a teacher may not consider how they can teach children with all sorts of learning differences, different ways of learning. So for me, the way that it's presented as a behavior issue, as it's presented as a medical issue, puts a problem, makes us look at a child as having the problem. And in the classroom, when you consider children as having problems, you find that teachers find it difficult then to deal with how they will teach, because they're already thinking this child has a problem and that child has a problem, and they may not engage their content in such a way that addresses all children equally.
That's a very good point that you brought up, that ADHD is considered a problem. If we had to reframe, if we as teachers reframe or relook at the way we look at ADHD as it's just another child, would it make a difference?
There would be a bit of a problem just saying it's just another child. But as much as I'm not saying there is not, I'm not saying that there isn't ADHD. There is that, but it is the way we frame it and make it look like the child has a problem. We could say that the child is active. So what can I as a teacher do to provide a learning environment that engages all children, including this child who has probably short attention spans or is very active, rather than looking at it as this child has ADHD and therefore we put the person in a box and then look for ways to deal with that problem. Rather than looking at, I have a class of 30 learners and all learners are different, so how can I meet the needs of all learners without specifying one has a problem and another doesn't?
So basically labeling. We should not be labeling or boxing our children.
Absolutely. It doesn't help the learner achieve their goals. It doesn't help the teacher also achieve the learning for all learners.
Okay. In South African classrooms today, as you mentioned, ADHD is used as a very common term. I don't think anyone has a problem with it, really. But if we look at how we can help children who are struggling with ADHD, what can we do in our classrooms that could both, within a dignified manner, without lowering the child's dignity and self-esteem, helping the child? Are there ways to do that, perhaps in the way we teach, the way we assess?
Okay. I think one of the things is that when teachers come to class with an approach that I have, that all learners are different and I will not look at one as a special learner only. I will look at ways in which I can teach all learners and provide options for all learners. So one of the things that, for example, in terms of inclusive pedagogy, where you're having learners, you're considering that every learner is different, is that then you see that you would engage more what you teach and how you teach it, so that you know as a teacher, you know your subject very well, so that you can be able to provide your learners with different options for how they will know the topic. So you don't teach the same way for all learners. You would vary your learning, the way you teach. You would also provide ways that is engaging for all learners, it's motivating, and you especially giving learners options for how they can present their work, how they can show that they understand their work, rather than saying there's only one way to present. Exactly. Yes. So that's one of the ways of doing that. The other thing is that is not very commonly done, is to also see that when a child is presenting with a learning difficulty, we always put the problem on the child, rather than looking at it as a teacher. How can it be a challenge for me to change the way I'm teaching? Rather than making the child fit into my teaching, why don't I teaching fit all the other learners? And then thirdly, I think teachers need to begin to go out of their small silos and learn to work together, and learn to collaborate and get new ideas from one another, rather than thinking my class is my only, I'm the only person who can deal with this class. We have a whole host of teachers. How can we work together?
Thank you, Washango. That was a very interesting discussion. I wish we had more time. And that's it for the show on ADHD. I hope it has given you some new and useful information, and I hope that you have enjoyed the show. Join us again next week for another episode of Schools Out. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.